she was so happy to see her dad. For those of you that knew my mom, you could see some real echoes of her dad. There's a lot of the mannerisms and so on, and so she was very, very close to her dad. So they moved down to Orlando, and back in those days it was orange groves and lots of lakes. Some of the stories that she would tell about going out and swimming in the lakes and together, and
no Disney World.
Yeah, right. Yeah, much too early for that. And they enjoyed. She started school down there. They attended a Methodist church, the Reeves Memorial. We went back and met Mrs. Reeves, or Miss Reeves. She never married.
That's right.
And she had salt shakers, didn't she?
She had a collection.
Yeah.
Interesting for a kid my age.
Yeah.
But yeah, this was Grandma's best friend, I think.
Yeah. So they would walk through this little part of it wasn't very far to the church. Grandma was not Methodist. She was Advent Christian. Advent Christian. But she had promised the Lord, since she didn't drive, that if there was a Protestant church within walking distance of the home, she would take them. And so there was this nice little Methodist church. I guess her dad had gone to some other churches, and a very interesting fellow, her dad. When he discovered the truths that the Advent Christian church hold certain things in common with Seventh-day Adventists. And one of those is about the state of the dead. He understood that when you die, you rest. And he understood that, and he was so outspoken that if he was in a church service and they would say it another way, he would stand up and say, "He's teaching the devil's lie." So, quite colorful. Grandpa Elder. Yep. Yeah, and he became elder, wasn't he, in the church there? So, in the Advent Christian church. And but they were going to this Methodist church, understanding that they had certain difference in doctrine, but believing that these were good Christian people, and they would love to go together to church. My grandfather was not connected to a church at the time, and in fact would be moping around, upset, as they were coming home from church, so happy they had been together, fellowshipping with the church, and he was miserable. And he didn't talk about it until years later, and we'll get to that part of the story later, because it's part of the blessing of God, the providence of God. But so they were in Orlando, and things were still hard. Somewhere in here, she described going down in Florida that there were lots of motels that were just abandoned. And so people would come in and just stay in a motel. And she remembered it as a small child, having the screens knocked out. And back in the day, some of you have been down to Florida, you know that they have a secondary state bird besides the mockingbird. It's the mosquito. And there were plenty of those. So I'm sure she had good, strong memories about that. But they made their way down from Orlando, and they had an opportunity for work because my grandfather's brother worked for Carl Fisher. He drove a car for him, and he had a job that he wanted my grandfather to do, who was a general contractor, and he could build just about anything. And so he went down there to work, and that's why they got the connection down there. So they moved to South Florida, and this I discovered from Mom not that long ago. She attended the same school.
Elementary school.
It was, at that time, it was a middle school, or junior high, I guess they'd call it. William Jennings Bryan School, which Rosanne and I and my older brother Mark also attended. But it was apparently not too far from where she lived. But then they bought some property in North Miami Beach. The place used to be called Fulford by the Sea. It wasn't North Miami. It was Fulford by the Sea. That was its actual name. Anyway, so they moved there and lived there, and we have, something for a story here. some of you are familiar with this. This is actually a newer one because she wore the stuffings out of the other one. But
this represents Snooky.
Snooky was a cat that my mom had when she was a child, and my grandfather, on time, bought bicycles, first for her older brother and then for her, and had to pay them off on time, which is, pretty hard, with thinness of work.
I think it was 50 cents a month or something.
Yeah, but that was, tough in those days. Well, she would ride around town on her bicycle with her cat on her shoulders, and people would think that it was a stuffed cat until they realized that it was her pet cat. So she had a number of cats through the years. So, Jack, would you like to hold Snooky?
Sure.
So she had lots of adventures with my uncle in those days, and then there was that day that was, you heard the announcement of it over the radio waves, a day that would live on in infamy. December 7, 1941. See, there you go. Does live on in infamy. And she had family visiting at the time when they heard the announcement, and it was her aunt, and they had a pet. It wasn't the cat at that time. It was another pet, and her aunt went into their bathroom and came out screaming, "There's a rat! There's a rat!" And it was just their pet rat. But that's how she remembered that day that lives on in infamy. And work became available because of the war, and my grandfather went to Charleston Navy Yard to work. So the family moved up there, still owned the property, but moved up to Charleston. And because they had only, 9 years of school at that time in South Carolina.
No, it was 11.
11?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It was...
this is why I asked her up here, because I knew she would get it right.
Okay, so their high school ended at grade 11 at that point in South Carolina. And Mom had just finished that grade, and she didn't want to have to repeat it or go back to 10th grade and finish up with 11. So she talked Grandma into connecting with relatives in Indiana, and I think she lived with Uncle Vern's family first, and finishing up her 12th grade there in Indiana.
Indiana Tech was the school, and she had many adventures with her cousins, had to share a bed with them, sleeping back, foot to head kind of thing. So maybe some of you heard of that sort of thing.
Yeah, that was with Uncle George's family. She soon moved there. And she said it was cold in Indiana, but with that many in a bed, they stayed warm.
Yeah, unless somebody had an accident and it get cold all of a sudden.
And she went to Indiana University there.
Then she, took her bachelor's in science in Indiana University, and we've got some pictures that you can see from that era. And then she wanted to continue in her studies, and of course this is now post-World War II. So she got a scholarship, and I've forgotten just how the story went on that, but she got a scholarship to go down all the way to New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm saying it the way the natives say it, because my dad is who she met while she was down there, and she graduated with her master's in social work. She had thought about doing nursing, but then she figured that social work would be something that she could do. And I would have to say that whether Mom was getting paid for it or not, social work was her life. Social work was her life. So that's where she met Dad.
Well, she was attending Tulane.
And he was going to dental school in Loyola.
And she went to the clinic.
Do you want to tell that part of the story? Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
At a certain point in life, you might need to see a dentist. And so Mom went to the clinic. That was where you went when you didn't have a lot of money, right? And there was a certain dental student there that seem to think a lot of my mom.
Yeah, the line is, she went and sat in the chair and just opened up her mouth, and he said, "Don't you have something better to do?" Something like that. I don't know, that was the line. But we've heard that for years. Anyway, they hit it off, and were married in 1950. And April of 1950.
I think it was like Easter vacation.
Yeah. And then he graduated, and then he got a job working with the Florida, traveling around doing the dental clinics. And our oldest brother, Mark, was born about in that time, and so his first months were traveling, staying in motels.
Well, Mom had worked just a short time in Miami as a social worker. She finished up.
And at Tulane also she had done
right. She had done an internship there at the orphanage, and in fact, their first couple of months of marriage were spent there. So then Mom worked for the Children's Aid Society in Miami, and I'm not sure exactly how long she was able to do that until she found out she was pregnant, and they had my brother in December that year, and very last little tax deduction.
Yeah, that's right, the 30th of December.
Just made it into that year.
Yeah, that was handy. So then, we're moving along the story, though, about, well, this little one, precious little one, came along in 4 years later, in July, and was Daddy's special little favorite.
Yeah, Mom called me a delayed firecracker.
Day after.
Because I hung in there till the day after Independence Day. And
well, that was her Independence Day.
Yeah, I think I was due into June, so Mom was real thankful. And it was hot in South Florida.
Yeah. So you guys lived at that time. Mom and Dad had bought a house.
There was a little 2-bedroom house, 1 bath, in Fulford by the Sea, which became North Miami Beach, and we lived in that neighborhood for a few years, till after you were born, Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
And across the street, this family moved in. There was a little girl just a year older than me. Her name was Vicky, and her mama was Mary Brown. And Vicky and I played together, and Mom and Mary became best friends, and Mom shared her faith.
Mary Brown happened to be from South Carolina.
Well, I think we kind of skipped a little piece of that puzzle, right?
Okay, well.
There was a lady that came into the neighborhood with some books.
Okay.
Did you have one of those books?
Yeah, I just happened to.
Yeah, and Mom had, in her studies in Indiana, she had learned a lot about history.
Mm-hmm.
And this book, The Triumph of God's Love, which is the Colputter's edition of the Great Controversy, had a lot of history in it. And Mom became very interested in that. And so she got this, and the bedtime stories, and the Bible stories, and some other books, I believe. And this lady kept coming back to the house till Mom had, we got written up in her book. This lady was a colporter in South Florida. She lived in Palm Beach, and she visited all parts of the world, but she wrote a little story about our mother, called her a librarian in her own home, because she had bought so many books. And as I understand it, Mom called up the church one day. This is baby Kevin. No.
Yeah.
Here you are.
Yeah, that's me.
And there's my brother Mark and myself. So Mom called the pastor and said, "How do you become a member?"
Now there's a little piece I need to add in here.
Okay.
All right. Now, okay, the logistics of this, when I say about Providence, I was just looking at it again here. This edition, which sells to this day, The Triumph of God's Love, not exactly this color, usually it's white, was first published in 1957, which is the year I was born. Mom and Dad were in Fulford by the Sea, going to a Methodist church, which my dad was raised Methodist. And they had a kind of a falling out with the church. My dad had recognized there was a fellow that was being pushed into a higher office in the church who he knew was having an affair at the very time that this was going on. And he brought it to the attention of the pastor, and rather than saying, well, you're right, Dr. Morgan, he said, he that is without sin cast the first stone. In other words, I'm not going to do anything about it. And my dad said, well, I'm done with religion. So Dad walked away, and he said to Mom, and we've heard it so many times, she said, Dad said, take the kids wherever you'd like to go.
Yeah, he didn't know what he was saying, did he?
Well, and about that time, they moved from Fulford by the Sea to North Miami to a little area that was growing up at the time. And when she started reading this book, she actually bought this book from my grandmother, because our grandmother loved to read. She loved reading books, but when she brought this book, and this is not the exact edition, but it was this color. It's not the exact book. Somehow or other, the one we got lost. But it's just this size, and it is this color. She said, Doris, how about you reading it? It's too big for me. So that's why my mom was reading it. And I was just a little suckling baby at the time. And Mom was a busy lady with 3 kids. And we still have recordings of Uncle Mark and at that age. And he was quite the yep, kind of little guy, talky guy. So there was no real time to have quiet except when she would take the book off to nurse the baby. So she would,
having your responsibility.
That's right. And she was enjoying this book so much that I put on a lot of weight back in that day.
Husky little guy.
Yeah, they used to call me chubby. So hard to believe. But she read the book, and she would go to verify its facts going to the library. And of course, she had to carry me along. So she put me in what she called the carry tot or something like that.
She had one of those
little sling.
Very primitive carriers.
A little sling. And she'd carry me along. And in the library, I was a good little baby. I was just a quiet little fellow. And what's that?
He still loves the library.
Yeah. Mom used to say that it's hard for me to go by a library without stopping in. So it just feels like home. But she checked it out, and she saw that this is a very historical work. And it had triggered with what she had learned from that little Quaker professor back in Indiana about Constantine, and it all, she said, for the first time, history made sense to her. And that's when she contacted Elder Johnson, who's in this picture.
And he was a president of the Carolina Conference at one
Later
time.
on, he became president of the Carolina Conference.
And he married us.
That's right.
True.
Yeah, he did.
There's a bit of history connected.
Yeah, we like to get a hold of him. So so she called him, and he was pastoring the North Miami Church, and I just discovered a couple of years ago when I was doing some research that church had just been dedicated. So the church that she was going to, if she had been in North Miami Beach, there wasn't a church that close. The closest church was just getting ready for us when she moved, when she bought the books, when she read the books because it was too big for Grandma, when she had a baby that could give her time to read the books. It all worked together. And then she joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And this picture was taken right outside that church. I remember the palm trees next to it. So that was her story. And this book has been a remarkable book in our life. It means a lot to us to understand. And only recently have I recognized that title is the absolute best title that could be given to the book. There's a whole series, and this is the last one in the series, for those of you that know about its author, Ellen White. And the first book in the series is called Patriarchs and Prophets. And the very first words, does anybody know what the very first words in Patriarchs and Prophets is? God is love. The very last words of this book, as its remarkable ending paragraph commences, it says, "The great controversy is ended. Sin and sinners are no more. The entire universe is clean. One pulse of harmony and gladness beats through the vast creation. From him who created all flow life and light and gladness throughout the realms of illimitable space. From the minutest atom to the greatest world, all things animate and inanimate, in their unshadowed beauty and perfect joy, declare that God is love." It is truly the triumph of God's love as he reveals himself to humankind and to the universe, and that's how it ends. Well, that's the beginning for us. That was the beginning of the story for us. And so then the rest of our history for Mom was always working with somebody. She was always some member of the church with kids that needed a ride to church, or when we started going to school. Do you want to tell about that?
Well, I'm going to back up because
Okay, please.
I think Mom started getting books even before we moved to North Miami. And our neighbor was Vicki and her mom, Mary Brown. And Mom was learning, and as she was learning, she was sharing. And isn't that the way it is when we're excited about the Lord? We want to tell everybody about it. And so Mary was a good friend of Mom's, and she was soaking it up just as fast as Mom was. And when Mom
They had been members together at the Methodist Church, too.
That's true.
Yeah.
And so when we wound up moving to North Miami, and they stayed there, but she also attended North Miami. And our grandparents eventually did. But as a result, her family, her sisters, became Adventist, and her parents, and the Camden Church sits on a piece of land that they donated. So there's a kind of a widened ripple.
Kind of like strawberries that sit out shoots.
Yeah. We're seeing that one effect. You got to jump in here because I can't even put into words what we're talking about, because any little thing that you may do and somebody's watching and somebody's learning, you don't know, but you're witnessing. That's true. Just by being a friend to somebody. And you don't know the far-reaching effects. You don't know that a church might be built because of something that you said or did. And Mom was just that way. You know, she was always making friends with people, always telling stories, and at the center of everything. And so she could not be contained. I think you know that as she lived here, it was that way. She knew all her neighbors, and she made friends with Gigi in the supermarket, right? Everywhere Mom went, she had something to share with somebody.
Yeah. So just wanted to tell you, though, we mentioned that my dad said, "Go take the kids where you like," and he kind of lived to rue that statement because Mom was all in for the church, and she was constantly, going to the church and giving faithful tithe. And as he would apportion some money, she would take some of the money, and he felt like that was stealing somehow, but because it wasn't his commitment. And so my dad and the Adventist church became kind of enemies in his mind, and was not very happy that she was going to the Adventist church. He came to have a different appreciation in time, but during those years it was difficult for her. So she was raising us within the church basically as a single parent as far as the spiritual leanings were concerned. And when I was as a kid, I remember there were so few dads in the church. They used to say there wasn't enough for a bass section in the church choir. There weren't very many dads, and that was my experience too. And Mom used to pray for us that we would have godly men that would come into our lives, that we could learn how to be a godly father. And so Mom would take us so that, if we went back home, my dad did work on Sabbath in his office, but if he came home, it was not going to be a great thing at our house. So she and some of her friends, which Mary Brown was one of them, and others, ladies in the church, who also had their kids, we would go to a local park. And it was, we kind of called it Grandma's Park, but it was actually Grinold's Park. But as a small kids, it sounded better like Grandma. But we'd go to Grinold's Park, and they had places that we could walk through the woods, and in time they brought in scarlet ibises and lots of exotic birds that we could look at and just traipse around in the woods. John, I know you did a lot of that as a kid on the west coast of Florida, but it was beautiful. The other John. Yeah. You were on the streets of Brooklyn.
Yeah, not you, John.
Yeah.
Oh, that John.
So Mom made this special thing for us, and we had great memories of the Sabbath. And I would recommend that to anyone, for kids, to make the Sabbath a special day. And it's always been for us. And as our kids came up, Becca can remember going to the park that we had in South Carolina or in North Carolina, wherever we were pastoring. We had a canyon right near here when we lived here in Belvedere. And we called it the canyon. It was just a hole in some sand where you go out there for Sabbath to make it something special, to go down to a river or someplace and always make it something special. And so we would go, and sometimes with Aunt Mary or with other people or with Aunt Vira, and the southern custom of calling people your aunt. We were not literally your aunt, but these were some of the special friends of my mom through the years, and we kept in touch with them through the years, and it was a delight to ever be able to visit with them again. So those were those years. Then we had another little sister. I was 10 years older than she when she was born.
And I was 13.
Oh, we kind of skipped over Dale. Sorry, Dale.
Dale. She mentioned Dale.
Dale, okay. Dale came along in 61, so in the middle of these same years. And then Dee Dee came along in 67. And somewhere about that time, and we were trying to get our notes together, we just, Mom decided that the older kids should go to the Adventist school. Okay?
I get to talk?
You get to talk.
Okay. So, Mom and Dad had a disagreement about this. Dad said that the public school was being paid for by his taxes, and that was good enough for us. Mom said she didn't like all the stuff that was going on in the public school. And especially for my older brother, he was in junior high, and things were starting to get kind of tricky for him. So, I'm not going to go into all the details, but she won. She won the argument. And my brother started in 9th grade. I started in 6th. Mark was in 9th. Kevin was in 3rd. And Dale soon started in 1st. Within a year.
Except that it was just going to be you and Mark going to school at first.
Yeah.
And I felt left out.
Well, I only got in because I kind of threw a fit.
Did you? Well, I begged and pleaded. So, and so what did Mom do to make up the difference?
Well, Mom had to go to work, actually, and she went back to being a social worker for the county. She was supervising all the nursing homes in Dade County, Florida. She had to go down to Jackson Hospital, where that center was. And actually, she only had to work there about 5 years. She gave me some extra money for singing lessons
5
at
years
that
or
point.
5 months?
5 months.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm thankful for you straightening me out. But it seemed like 5 years to my sister. Yeah. Because she was staying during the week with my grandma. And on the weekends, we had Dee Dee home with us. And that got old for Mom. She didn't like to feel like she wasn't a part of my sister's life as much as she wanted to be. And so
Although
she figured out.
grandma was great.
Grandma was our second mom,
Yeah.
you know. Grandma came to church to babysit.
Mhm.
And then